We know the scene well. The feared Count Dracula, an icon of evil, repelled at the last second by the power of the crucifix. And this, the priest, a symbol of absolute goodness, the spirit of the light. Many of these films are explicitly Christian propaganda with a missionary agenda, says Hector Avalos, a professor of religious studies at Iowa State University who teaches a class on religion and film. Avalos compares movies like The Omen to Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, claiming they both have an agenda. Many filmmakers actually believe in the message of their films. They see their jobs as being missionaries for Christianity, and film is their missionary tool. Fear is their missionary tool. The message is that evil is real enough to be feared, and that you should view Christianity or religion as the best answer. Horror movies are an honest reflection of human terror. From them, we can extrapolate a moral code, a conscience, and build a picture of the society that exists around it. Western society, for a very long time, was gripped by faith. Christianity had a stranglehold on the people, and as such, the church had final say on what was right or otherwise. This is made clear from the heavy use of religious symbolism in classic horror movies. Its evidence is overwhelming. Watch here this scene from Wes Craven's seminal horror, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger, the grotesque terror of the Elm Street franchise, establishes the certainty of his evil early on as he preys upon the movie's protagonist Nancy, who lies in bed sleeping. He knocks the crucifix from her wall. The message is clear. That divinity you rely upon for protection is of no use here. At once, menace and threat are established. Krueger operates outside the moral boundaries of the church. In 2010, director Michael Bay saw fit to produce a remake to the Wes Craven picture that ignited a franchise. The previous scene, Krueger, and the bedroom wall survived the update. However, in re-realising this story for a new generation, changes were made, most notably the omission of the cross. A Nightmare on Elm Street exemplifies in micro what this video will explore in macro, that the role of religion in horror films has shifted. Regarding 1973's The Exorcist, the late Roger Ebert had this to say. What we get here aren't the delicious chills of a Vincent Price thriller, but raw and painful experience. Hailed to this day as one of the most terrifying cinematic experiences, The Exorcist is a classic known to all horror fans. Films like The Exorcist generally show a connection to God that has gone missing. The jaded priest or the non-practicing mother of the possessed child are strong tropes for these movies. They almost always indicate ongoing battles between good and evil dating back thousands of years, and the church is the saving grace of the suffering, unfortunate women who the devil has inevitably taken hold of. That quote from a 2019 article published by the prestigious website Sci-Fi Wire explains the statement behind the terror of horror films like The Exorcist. The fear is rooted in the religious faith carried by the casual moviegoer of the 1970s. Cinemas screening this movie saw audience members pass out or flee the cinema due to the severity of the terror that gripped them. The Exorcist managed to achieve what every horror movie hopes to achieve. It convinced its audience that the terror existed beyond the picture.
The power of Christ compels you!
Fast forward to 2018 and a new type of horror reigns supreme. This has been described as an exorcist for a new generation. Ari Aster's cinematic debut shook cinemagoers to their very core upon release. It is brutally honest in its depiction of a traumatic event that tears a family apart. What then becomes interesting is how the movie ties the unnatural to the supernatural. In an interview just prior to the release of the film, Ari Aster said this.
I wanted to have this feeling that there was something omniscient going on. You get that in the first scene where we're pushing in on this dollhouse that's been cut down the middle so that all the rooms are exposed, and a metaphor is set up there that these people are like dolls in a dollhouse, that they have no agency.
The movie is intricate, and what transpires within it are a result of the machinations of a nefarious cult. This comes as a reveal in the story, but the cult is present throughout the entire picture, from almost the very first scene. What's interesting is the visual language of the cult. First seen in what appears to be a church, at a funeral, they lean heavily into familiar Christian imagery. They wear symbolic necklaces, as one might wear a crucifix. Their clothing, when worn, is homely and bright. Their demeanour friendly, as seen in the character of Joan. Even the pamphlet they send to Annie is designed to implicate a Christian purity. The connections are deliberate and the suggestion powerful. The organisation and orchestration of faith is now what we fear. With changing views and recent revelations, we've seen what religion is capable of, the darkness suppressed by the pious facade of the church. And to trust in that blindly, as we did for so long, is an invitation of evil. Do not trust in Joan. Do not trust that something is nice because it tells you it is. Terry Ray Clark and Dan W. Clayton supported this in their 2012 text, Understanding Religion and Popular Culture. They wrote that churches have become centres of evil rather than sanctuaries, clergy work for the forces of darkness rather than common good, and supernatural beings we believe are on our side turn out to be anything but. This philosophy exists across the contemporary horror landscape. It's not exclusive to Hereditary. The Paranormal Activity franchise, as it developed, began to explore the origins of its demonic threat, and as it turns out, the menace was invited in by a legion of the devout with roots to the victim's own family. Regression, a 2015 movie with horror stylings, centres on the actions and activities of cloak-wearing, pale-faced cultists. 2018's Apostle is entirely about the vile hypocrisies of a cult, shown firsthand as the film's protagonist infiltrates the organisation and is exposed to the group's twisted practices. Even Jordan Peele's premiere feature Get Out pulls on familiar iconography of classic Christianity. The Armitage family, villains of the piece, present themselves friendly and charitable. Dressed well, dressed white, they are supposed to echo the cinematic purity of yore. An article from the BBC states, if it's not relevant, it's not necessarily scary. It's hardly surprising that horror film might reflect what's causing anxiety in society. It is inescapable that religion has shifted from what made us feel safe to what keeps us up at night. It would be remiss, of course, to discuss the shift in religious perspective found in contemporary horror cinema without acknowledging the fact that cults have long existed in the twisted corners of the genre. The most prolific example of such an occurrence is the original Wicker Man film from 1973. For those unaware, this movie sees young Sergeant Howie travel to a remote Scottish isle in search of a missing child. What he discovers instead are manic rituals performed by a desperate people, believing this is the key to a bountiful harvest. As the movie ends, Sergeant Howie finds himself in the centre of spectacle in the worst possible way.
I believe in the life eternal, as promised to us by our Lord Jesus Christ!
Entombed in the titular Wicker Man, where he is burned alive to the joy of the people. There exists a contemporary horror perfect for comparison to this. Funnily enough, not the film's 2005 reboot, of which the less said the better.
Oh, not the beast! Not the beast!
Ari Aster's follow-up to Hereditary, 2019's Midsommar, is an apparent homage to the classic Wicker Man. Midsommar deals with many of the same concepts and chills, down to the incendiary ending. However, there are some very notable deviations in play. Sergeant Howie in The Wicker Man was a practising Christian, a man whose character was tied to his faith.
Sir, have these children never heard of Jesus?
None of Midsommar's central characters are religious, aside from Pelle, but we'll come to that in a moment. Another primary deviation are the conditions that the group of friends at the movie's core are introduced to the film's own haunting cult. Pelle, one of the group, was raised amongst the Harga. He celebrates their rites and rituals, and he is the one to invite the group of friends inside. This is in keeping with our analysis of other contemporary horrors. Once again, the movie is lifting a lens upon our lives, using the extraordinary to provoke inspection of the ordinary. Faith surrounds us. Is it as harmless as it would seem? The final, notable deviation from source to subject is in the protagonist's journey. Despite the flick being something of an ensemble piece, Florence Pugh's Dani is the narrative's obvious protagonist. The events told almost entirely from her anguished perspective. Dani's arc throughout the film is one of belonging, of acceptance and of kinship. Her boyfriend and the group she travels with to Sweden largely reject her, uninterested in the suffering she relentlessly endures. The Harga, however, come to worship Dani as their May Queen, and Dani comes to revel in this fact. Take this set of scenes for some insight into this. Near the climax of the movie, Dani catches her boyfriend Christian cheating on her, and her grief upon this revelation is intense, but most notably, shared with members of the Harga. Compare this with the scene early on, in which Dani anguishes over the loss of her family in Christian's company, who is completely cold to her. Moments like these allow us understanding in Dani's journey, and the end of her story is designed to supply the viewer with an equal measure of catharsis and terror. We understand why Dani has found a place among the Harga, but we are not supposed to like the fact that she has. Despite this being a strong deviation from the journey found in The Wicker Man, this arc strongly echoes another found in a classic horror film, Roman Polanski's iconic 1968 release, Rosemary's Baby. The plot of this seminal feature is best explained by this analysis provided by an article published in late 2019 on the website Cheat Sheet. Rosemary's Baby takes many elements from the biblical stories of Christmas and subverts them. Mary, the mother of Christ, is a virgin, whereas Rosemary, the mother of the Antichrist, is sexualised early in the film. Mary was impregnated by the Holy Spirit, meanwhile Rosemary is impregnated by the devil through rape. The character of Rosemary Woodhouse has one very obvious, very vocal desire on which the entire movie is hung. Rosemary wants to be a mother. What transpires narratively is wish fulfillment in the most awful of ways. Rosemary gives birth to the Antichrist, a fact which is at first concealed from her. But as the movie draws to a close, Rosemary is at long last reunited with her son, and she makes a decision not to abandon the child to the care of the coven of witches responsible for its birth, but rather to be what she has always wanted to be, a mother. As with Midsummer, this ending comes as much with horror as it does understanding. This would have been built out of a popular faith of the 1960s, Christianity.
God is dead! Satan lives!
Whereas Midsummer's leads are faithless in reflection on the typical audience member, Rosemary Woodhouse is Catholic. This religion is more than just a facet of Rosemary's being though, it is the moral blueprint of her character. The church defines what is right and what is wrong in her world. This brushstroke and characterisation was common in classical horrors. An article published by Georgetown University on religion and gender in horror films states that even horror films that do not utilise overtly Christian symbols often punish characters for engaging in drugs, premarital sex and other lewd activities. In classic horror, religion tells us what is right and what is wrong. Protagonists like Rosemary Woodhouse are expected to practice a particular faith, and as such we know them to be good. The bad characters in the film are the ones who stray away from or violate this faith. While this keeps things straightforward for the audience, it is also alarmingly dull. Contemporary horrors have shifted stance on religion and as such opened the door to a slew of more rounded and rich characters. Take 2015's The Invitation for instance. Will, our lead character, is challenged both morally and emotionally early on in the story. Injuring a stray coyote with his car, he's faced with a dilemma. Does he kill the beast, ending its misery, or leave it to die an agonising and slow death? Will elects the latter option, mercifully putting the creature down. This is a moment designed to test the character and also acquire audience attentions. We've witnessed Will agonise, we know what he did was difficult, but we support his actions and are now rooting for the success of his character. Handily, this also invites the elements of violence, pain and death into the story, effectively setting the character and tone. The coyote scene from The Invitation is relevant too for the fact that it is a twisted subversion of the writing principle established in Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. This principle, on which the book was named after, is described by Blake. Save the Cat is a screenwriting rule that says the hero has to do something when we meet him so that we like him and want him to win. Murdering a coyote is quite some distance from saving a cat, but it succeeds nonetheless in endearing us to the character of Will. With the progression in the depiction of religiosity in horror cinema comes an absence of moral unity in the movies made, but this is not a bad thing. Horror today pushes boundaries, sets foot in water previously untroubled. An essay on the sanctification of fear asserts now horror films taught us our next door neighbour might be the monster. All the rules begin to change. A. This monster cannot be defeated. B. All collective action at doing so is bound to fail, and C. The moral uprightness will get you nowhere. A changing view of religion and horror means a re-exploration of our protagonist's values and a more realistic standard being established. Heroes sin and swear and pay little love to the cross. Evil smiles and may say grace with you at dinner. Religion in horror movies has shifted, and this is cause for celebration. The terror that steps into our very nightmares are more visceral, inventive and alluring than they've ever been. Horrors are boundless now, and that means they're unpredictable, pushing on into new territory. And if there's anything that a century of horror cinema has taught us, nothing scares us quite like the unknown.